What's up, guys? So today we're going to talk about the equity fallacy. The equity fallacy is an economic fallacy, and it revolves around a deep misunderstanding of economics and equity in general. And most of these ideas come from Marxist theories, because in Marxist theories, they see inequity as evidence of oppression, and they see inequity as just evidence of an exploitative program. But that's not true, because inequity is caused by incredibly complex factors, and not all of them are unjust. We'll start this off by looking at the realities of inequity. So the first reality of inequity is that equity is natural. It is the norm and not the exception. You will never compare any group by any metric and find perfect equity. So for example, we're going to go over a few different ways to analyze income. So for example, if you take everyone's income by eye color, you'll see that people with brown eyes actually make more money than everyone else. If you take everyone's income by age, you'll see that middle-aged people make more money than young people and older people. If you look at height, you'll see that on average, people that are taller generally make more money. Or if you look at religion, you'll see that Jews and Hindus make a lot more money than everyone below them. Or if you look at ethnicity, you'll see that Italians make more than Irish. And the last one is if you look at race, you'll see that Asians make more than whites. You can try to measure these inequities by just about any characteristic of people, and you will always find inequity. And that's because people act very differently from one another, regardless of anything about their cultural background or racial identity. What's the biggest problem about when people talk about inequity is they talk about it as some sort of measurement of well-being, but it actually is not a measurement of well-being, and it doesn't tell you how well any group is doing just by looking at inequity. So for example, if we look at religion, just because Jews make way more money than Catholics doesn't mean that Catholics are doing bad. Or just because Asians are doing better than whites doesn't mean that whites are doing bad. So inequity doesn't tell you anything about the performance of those groups. You have to use relativistic measurements, right? So like, for example, you want to look at people's standard of living. You want to see what their access to resources are. You want to see the average incomes that they're making, their household sizes, and the cost of goods and services that they have to pay for. And you can even add in how bad is crime in those areas that they're living. So when you look at, for example, the poverty line, as long as you're a 4-person family and you're making about 27 grand a year, you're above the poverty line. And the average income for every race is significantly above the poverty line. And the average household has about 2.5 kids. So most families, even ones that have more than 2 or 3 kids, are well above the poverty line as long as you're making above 40 grand. And even if you are below the poverty line, the standard of living for impoverished people in the United States is not the same compared to anywhere else in the world, right? You can see here, and this is in 2005, and this has actually gotten significantly better since 2005. If you look at poor households, you'll see that they actually have a variety of amenities that a lot of people wouldn't normally have in an impoverished state. And these are better now, like I was saying. You know, a lot of people that are in poverty have smartphones, right? They have a home to live. They have air conditioning. They have television. They have a lot of these different things, which really makes poverty. I'm not downplaying that poverty can still suck or that it's okay to be impoverished. It's just that the standard of living is far higher than what we would have guessed for an impoverished person. So this shows how equity is not a measurement of well-being, and you actually have to look at relativistic standards to that society to understand the standard of living that those people are living in. And this leads us into our next point, that inequity is not evidence of oppression. And if it was, then we would have to say we'd live in an Asian supremacist society because Asians are the highest earning income in the United States. You would actually have to say that we live in an oppressive Jewish Hindu supremacist society as well because they are the top income workers as well. The fact that you see inequity between groups does not mean that there is a system of oppression creating that inequity. There are many things that could be influencing it. So we can't know at face value how much inequity is from each variable. Inequities result from complex variables. Sometimes it is from oppressive entities, and sometimes it is not. It's often a result in normal consensual individual differences in each person. It requires nuance to identify, and generalizing it is not nuanced. And both in Marxist theories and in critical race theories, they both say that any amount of inequity is evidence of class oppression or evidence of racial oppression, which is just not true. So we cover that equity is not a measurement of well-being, and also inequity is not evidence of oppression. Otherwise, you would have to start framing our society around how it's a Jewish supremacy, a Hindu supremacy, or an Asian supremacy. And that just simply is not the case. Another fallacy made is that equity is possible to achieve. It is not possible to achieve without a totalitarian surveillance state or a government set income rate. Because without those things, people would have to, just by chance, be living their lives in a way that produces perfect equity across all groups. And that's impossible to have, right? So the only way you can truly achieve it is by making everyone get paid the same amount, independent of the amount of hours that they work, and then you can at the end of the year see that everyone by every metric is making the same amount of money. But this is dangerous because it erodes economic incentives that create growth, right? Like, people aren't going to work harder if they're going to get paid the same amount no matter what at the end of the week. And it also ushers in a very violating government system that is constantly analyzing every little thing that you do so that it can create the inequity that it wants, right? And we can see that well in Cuba.
Welcome to the Cuban economy. Right after the Socialist Revolution in 1959, Fidel Castro's government seized almost all private businesses and land.
You won't have to worry about next year. The state will do your planning from now on.
Every restaurant, factory, hospital, and home was property of the government. The state set prices for everything and decided how much people got paid. The private sector disappeared overnight.
The world these men live in desperately needs economic reforms.
You can see the result of this if you go looking for food in Havana today. When I showed up, I was pretty excited to see what street food was on offer, but all I could find was this. Just this. Ham sandwiches everywhere. Here's a typical scene in a Cuban eatery. Too many employees in an empty establishment with empty shelves.
So the reason why the Cuban government abolished private property and set income rates is because they wanted to eliminate inequity. And that was their goal, and this is how they do it. You can see here on the Human Rights Watch organization that Cuban government continues to repress dissent and deter public criticism. There is no free speech in Cuba because if you criticize their ideas, they see you as trying to promote ideas that create inequity, which is oppression in their minds. So in their eyes, they're defending themselves from your oppression. But you can see that these policies create great economic damage to the local community. A lot of people like to say that the embargo creates this, but that's actually not true. You can actually buy a lot of the same products that you want from European countries that we have here in the United States, but Cubans don't have the money to pay for them because their income is set by the government, which is incredibly low, and they can't afford it. So countries that pursue this goal of equity actually have the lowest economic success as well as the highest human right abuses because it takes that kind of control to achieve it. So another great example of this is looking at China during the communist rule of Chairman Mao, right? You can see that actually the entire time he was trying to eliminate inequity for his entire reign, he never lifted anyone out of poverty. By the end of his reign, he had more than 90% of the population was living in poverty. There was equity, but everyone was equal in their poverty. And these economic woes and human right abuses follow closely these countries that are pursuing equity. And if you look at the Soviet Union and you look at any of the 15 Soviet states, there was brutal repression and economic woes everywhere. Cambodia, North Korea, and like we were saying, China as well. So just as a quick recap, we established that equity is natural and found in everywhere. We established that equity is not a measurement of well-being and other measurements should be used. We showed that inequity is not evidence of oppression. We established that it was impossible to achieve equity and that countries that try to pursue it turn out to be Orwellian police states with poor economies and low human rights records. So that wraps up the inequity fallacy. I hope you guys have a great day.